Welcome you all to Trek Wars. So, one of the things that's really interesting about the Star Trek universe is you really don't get very much use of fighters. We have shuttlecrafts, but the shuttlecrafts are not really, they're more like cars in the Star Trek universe. They're not really going around and fighting with them too often. They don't really have weapons that are really capable of doing much of anything. And that's pretty much how we think about them and the way they're portrayed through most of the Star Trek, universe. There are occasions where they'll use them to as a boarding party and things of that nature, but for the most part, they're pretty useless. Then comes the next generation. And then we get these ships that we call fighters, but they're actually full-blown starships. They're large, and they definitely are bigger than a shuttlecraft. They're in the range of 23 to 20 meters long instead of our typical, anywhere from 3 meters going up to 9 meters. And so there's a huge difference in the size comparison between what is considered a fighter and what is a shuttlecraft. Now, some people want to kind of say that they don't really have fighters in the Star Trek universe, and that's absolutely not true at all. They have lots of different fighters, and they've had fighters for a very long time. Matter of fact, every member of Starfleet learns how to fly a shuttlecraft, and they also learn how to fight with Starfleet fighters, and they learn how to fight in formations. Now, why is this? And that's a really good question. So the answer is Starfleet officers are trained to deal with any scenario that can come about. They're extremely well trained. And one of the things that they are going to be trained on is how to operate fighters. Now, the reason they're going to learn how to operate fighters is because there's a high probability at some point in time that they might be actually defending a colony on the outskirts of Starfleet, and the only thing that they're going to be using and operating are going to be fighters. So the reason why Starfleet officers are being trained to use these kinds of ships is because it's going to be necessary for defending colonies. They're also going to be designated to do mundane things like bring supplies, medical supplies, these little colonies, or equipment. And you're going to travel from system to system, from system to system. Now, obviously, when you're on the outskirts of Federation territory and you're using Federation technology, there's a high probability that pirates at some point in time are going to enter the system and are probably going to try to steal from you. And so your choices are do nothing because you have nothing, or you can have the Federation fighters chase them down and kill them. I mean, these fighters are pretty powerful, and they could take on a lot of small frigates. They'd be capable of destroying other shuttlecrafts, and it'd be a great deterrent for any kind of piracy. So they're basically an anti-piracy starship, is basically what fighters are in the Star Trek universe. They're not really equipped for taking on cruisers and things of that nature, but if you get enough of them, they got enough firepower that they can do something. All right, for those of you who watched the Federation carrier video, and we talked about the amount of fighters that these ships could carry and stuff, and I wanted to show you guys how actually overwhelmingly powerful the Peregrine fighters actually are in the Federation universe, because I didn't really realize how strong they were when I made the video. I kind of figured this out after I made the video, and it was too late to go back. So I kind of want to share with some additional details that I didn't really catch when I first was making the video. So an alpha strike. Okay, so we all know what that is. It means that first strike that you get to hit your enemy, right? We know Klingons and Romulans are really into alpha strikes. Well, the Peregrine fighter, it can hit an alpha strike of 351,000 points of damage. So it'll fly in, it's going to launch its torpedoes, and then it's going to follow up with its Type 8 phaser emitters. That will deliver 351,000 points of damage. Now, in the scenario where you're fighting against the Jem'Hadar and the Jem'Hadar fighters, you will take about 2 fighters to destroy a Jem'Hadar fighter. So that means that if you were to send one of our carriers that only carries 16 fighters aboard it, and it launches those fighters, and they are in the best case scenario, and they don't get shot down, and they get to the target, they can destroy up to 8 Jem'Hadar fighters with one Alpha Strike. So you think about the Akira, and it's 24, I believe, is what it carries. Then you have the Constellation class, which has got 40. And then you have, obviously, the Curries, which have got their 16. Now, just kind of think about what we just talked about. And then this is the visualization of how much firepower just 5 ships is bringing to Starfleet if these guys are there and loaded up. And now, check this out. So you have an Akira launching its fighters, and let's just say they're all Paragon fighters. 12 Jem'Hadar fighters are going down just by that first barrage. Now, if you're using the fighters with our Curry, it's going to be 8 fighters going down, which is still impressive. And then our Constellation class, it's got 40 fighters aboard, possibly 20 ships dead within the first Alpha Strike. That is spectacular. So if you take a look at the Curry class and you look at all its fighters and put them together and you put all their weapons into one giant pile, it's delivering an additional 4,368,000 points of damage to the enemy fleet or enemy target or ship, whatever. That is a lot of firepower. That is a ton of firepower. All right, so we know the Akira is an absolute beast, and I guess typically it carries 6 runabouts and 12 fighters, and I believe that's what this is representing. So just not counting the Akira's torpedoes, not its phasers, nothing. Just the fighters that it's hanging out and bringing aboard to the fight, 6,554,000. This is crazy amount of firepower. Absolutely crazy amount of firepower that you're bringing as one giant, incredible, huge Alpha Strike. Now let's get to the king of fighters here. So this is the honest reason why you guys are getting this bonus video is because when I did these calculations, when I was doing the video and then I made these after the video came out, I was just like, you know what? I'm kind of curious, how much firepower are you actually getting from these little piles of little ships? And then when I did this analysis, I went, wait a minute. So the Constellation class starship brings in 40 of these little fighters. That's going to be 10,920,000 points of damage, right? And now imagine they're attacking something, right? What is this? What is this comparable to? Yep, it's Sovereign class starship. So it's possible, right? Possible that a Constellation class starship could go toe to toe with something that is in the realms of a Sovereign level power level because of its overwhelming fighters. Now, this would be really, really, really effective against Birds of Prey, Jem'Hadar fighters. Now, when it comes to Federation starships and even higher level Dominion ships like the cruisers, this is going to drastically drop. Now, I'm going to be honest. Everything that we're talking about, there's one giant factor that I got to talk about, and I'm going to say it right now. So this is obviously all dependent on the ship's ECM and ECCM abilities. So ECM is ability to target. ECCM is the exact opposite. So it's a counter-targeting system. Now, I don't know what the ECM's abilities are on these little fighters. We know that the ECM abilities that are on the runabouts are decent, but we don't know anything about the fighter. So that's a big iffy on its strength value, is because if it doesn't have good ECCMs, it's a huge problem. The ship is going to get shot out of the sky really fast. Now, if it does have good ECCM, which I would expect it to, then this thing is a game changer. So the importance of fighters did not go unnoticed by the other great powers either. So the Klingons were creating fighters too, like the Toduch fighter. And it would be, I would speculate, to be similar power levels or akin to the Paragon fighter. So it's probably, looks to me like it just has disruptors. I don't know if it carries torpedoes or micro torpedo or not. To be honest with you, I don't really have a lot of information about it. Its size, to me, it looks to be similar to the Paragon size. So it's not a shuttlecraft. It's obviously in the fighter category, which I consider to be larger vessels. Now, the Romulans have a single disruptor fighter, which is a true fighter. It's very small. It's the size of a shuttlecraft, and two crew. There's a driver, there's a gunner, and that's it. Really small, actual fighter, like a true fighter that we think of like Star Wars. So I just want to point that out. Now, when it comes to these fighter craft that I'm basically saying are these larger ships, the Romulans have their own variant. They have a Romulan shuttle, which has, I believe, 4 disruptors, and it's capable of cloaking, and all around, it's a pretty beefy little tiny ship. So, like I said, the Scorpion is only 7 meters long. The other Romulan variant, which is basically the runabout version of the Romulans, is 24 meters. So I would consider the 24-meter shuttle to be a fighter. All right, so there are other ships in the Romulan Empire that could go in this category. So the Romulan shuttle, which is the Theta class. Now, I don't know if I'm saying this correct or not, but this thing is, it's a little bit overly powerful for what I would consider in the fighter category. It's got 6 disruptors, 2 torpedo launchers. It can carry up to 15 people on board, and it's capable of going like warp 9.7 or warp 9.5. That is getting in the realms of basically a small starship, but it is similar in size to the runabout, so it could go in this category as a fighter. Now, if it was going in that category in fighter, it's obviously not just a normal fighter. It would be a heavy fighter, because that is an astronomical lot of firepower. Now, I even saw this, and I don't agree with this, but it says it operates with a quantum singularity, just like the Warbird does. So it's got like a mini version. Like, if that's the case, and it's like almost unlimited power, like that means that this thing could possibly be operating Romulan disruptors with the same power output that we see a Romulan Warbird doing. And if that's the case, this is so insanely OP that I don't know why they didn't just build fleets of these things. Now, maybe that's not the case. I don't know. But I just wanted to point that out. Some of the data that they're saying in some of these little tiny ships and stuff it's too powerful sometimes. But, okay. So basically the reason why I'm even considering this to be in the fighter category is because I'm allowing the runabout to be in a fighter category. And if I'm doing that, it's unfair to say that the Romulan vessel can't be in that same category, because they're literally almost identically the same size. Now, probably the largest ship on this category list of my definition of a fighter would be the Bird of Prey fighter, which we see attacking Deep Space Nine, which is 50 meters, 80 metric tons. Can operate with 1 crew member. It's got 2 standard disruptors and 1 torpedo launcher, which is a weaker variant. It's a pretty strong ship. It's got all-around defense of 390,000 for a fighter. It's in the acceptable range. The only thing about that is, yes, it's really, really small, but it's also not that small. That means it's twice the size of a runabout. It's almost getting to the point where I would say it's just a really light frigate, maybe, instead of calling it a fighter, but it does fall in the category of fighter. And then, honestly, I don't really see how Klingon ships could carry these things. And as far as I'm concerned, they have just standard warp, and they don't need to be carried. And I kind of think that if you're a fighter, it's kind of necessary that you should be carried, or you're only short distance, like obviously the runabouts or the Peregrine fighter, which I believe that is capable of warp 6. The runabout is warp 5, if I remember correctly. So you can get from place A to B as long as it's not too far. That's what I think of like a fighter. So fighters are really versatile. It allows you to protect more than one area with ships that are capable of producing a decent amount of firepower. They have sensors, and they have transporters, and they carry a little bit of cargo. They'd be good for deep space not deep space exploration, but planetary exploration, or at least in the system, that warn you of incoming vessels if you don't have a sophisticated array system already set up. A lot of versatility to Federation fighters and just fighters in the Star Trek universe. Overall, they're more impressive than I originally thought about them. And as time's grown on, I've become more accustomed to liking fighters and seeing fighters as a more versatile tool in the Star Trek universe. So when I think about a runabout versus the Peregrine fighter is going to have a lot more limitations than a runabout fighter. Now, I would think, in my opinion, that the runabout is more of a drop ship than I would say a actual fighter. I think that the best role for this thing to be would be like just a small contingent force. Like this thing is on a cloaked ship be the best scenario. You get into a system, you then drop this guy off, and then you can fly down to wherever you need to go. You can get in, you can get out pretty quickly. You can drop off a decent amount of troops. You have enough firepower that if you do run into something, you can defend yourself. Like, these are very versatile weapons. I think that they're much more efficient. And then when I think about them, like, if I was bringing them into the Star Wars universe, what Federation and what the Klingons and the Romulans call a fighter, it's not really a fighter. Let's just be honest. It's like the Millennium Falcon. The Millennium Falcon is, a transport ship. Whatever category you want to put it, that's how I look at it. It's too big to be an actual fighter, but it's not big enough that you're going to call it an actual starship, like Star Trek thinks of starships. It is a starship, but it's so little compared to what is normally seen in the Star Trek universe, but it's so much bigger than an actual shuttlecraft. So I don't consider them actual shuttlecrafts. I think that in the Star Trek universe, there are shuttles, there are fighters, and then there are small frigates. And these things are really coming close to coming all together in those categories. They're small where they can fit inside of a starship, which is almost like a fighter. They're big enough and can carry crew that they're operating like a starship. And they have enough firepower that they can operate like a light frigate. So where do they belong? I don't know.